In the heart of a bustling ranch, where horses galloped freely and dogs roamed as loyal companions, an extraordinary bond was forming, one that defied all expectations of nature and nurture. Comet, a spirited Mustang Foal, had been abandoned by his herd and left to face the world alone. But fate intervened in the form of three unlikely caregivers, Max, Bella, and Charlie, three devoted dogs who refused to let him succumb to despair. What unfolded next was nothing short of miraculous, a tale of love, acceptance, and identity so profound it would challenge everything we thought we knew about animal behavior. From his first shaky steps, Comet didn't just survive, he thrived under the care of his adoptive canine family. He learned to bark instead of whinny, play fetch like a pro, and even snuggle up for naps in ways no horse ever should. Yet, this wasn't just a story of survival. It was a testament to the power of belonging. Through the unconditional love of his dog siblings, Comet discovered not only how to live, but also how to embrace his unique place in the world. This journey will remind you that being different isn't something to overcome. It's something to celebrate. It's a story of resilience, adaptability, and the transformative power of love. Through Comet's courage and his pack's unwavering support, we are reminded that sometimes the most extraordinary connections come from breaking the rules of convention. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more inspiring tales of courage, connection, and the wonders of the animal kingdom. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into Comet's unforgettable journey, a testament to the beauty of embracing who you are, no matter how unconventional. Have you ever witnessed an animal friendship that defied logic? Let us know in the comments below. The Montana wilderness was unforgiving that spring morning when ranch hand Jake Williams heard the desperate whinnying echoing across the valley. Following the sound, he discovered a heartbreaking scene. A newborn Mustang Foal, barely hours old, struggling beside its dead mother. The mare had apparently died during birth, leaving the golden-colored colt completely helpless. Jake knew the foal's chances were slim without immediate intervention. Living in a remote cabin with only his three dogs for company, Jake made a decision that would change all their lives. He carefully lifted the weakened foal into his truck and brought it home. His three dogs, Rex, a German Shepherd, Buddy, a Golden Retriever, and Scout, a Border Collie, watched curiously as Jake carried the tiny horse into the barn. The foal was so small it barely reached Rex's shoulder height. What happened next surprised even Jake. As he prepared formula to bottle feed the foal, his dogs surrounded the shivering baby horse. Rex, the pack leader, began licking the foal clean, just as he would a puppy. Buddy laid down beside it, sharing his warmth. Scout kept watch, alerting Jake whenever the foal made the slightest sound. The dogs had instantly adopted this strange, long-legged baby as one of their own. Over the following weeks, something remarkable developed. The foal, which Jake named Comet for the white star on its forehead, began mimicking the dog's behavior. When the dogs barked at approaching vehicles, Comet would lift his head and attempt to bark, too, producing a peculiar neigh-bark hybrid that made Jake laugh. During feeding time, Comet would wait in line with the dogs, expecting his bottle when they got their bowls. The most endearing behavior emerged during playtime. When Jake threw tennis balls for the dogs, Comet would gallop after them, try to pick up the balls with his mouth, just like his canine siblings. He'd drop the slobbery ball at Jake's feet and wait expectantly for another throw. At night, instead of standing like a normal horse, Comet would lie down in the barn, curled up in a pile with all three dogs. By 3 months old, Comet had fully integrated into the pack. He followed the dogs everywhere, attempted to scratch behind his ears with his hind leg like they did, and even tried to lift his leg when marking territory, a comical sight that never failed to amuse visitors. The local veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Chun, was fascinated by Comet's behavior, documenting the unusual case of species confusion. But for Comet, there was no confusion. He simply knew he was part of the pack. As Comet grew larger, his dog-like behaviors became increasingly pronounced and often hilarious. Now 6 months old and significantly bigger than his canine siblings, he still insisted on squeezing into their doghouse during thunderstorms. The sight of the gangly colt with his head inside the doghouse, while his entire body remained outside, became a common source of amusement for Jake and visitors to the ranch. The morning routine was particularly entertaining. When Jake let the dogs out at dawn, Comet would bound out with them, attempting to lift his leg at every fence post just like Rex. He'd given up trying to lift his hind leg like a dog, but had developed his own modified version, a peculiar stance where he'd lift one front leg while relieving himself. The dogs seemed to accept this as perfectly normal pack behavior. Comet's protective instincts mirrored those of his canine family. When delivery trucks approached the ranch, he'd run to the gate with the dogs, producing his signature bark while pawing the ground. Delivery drivers were often startled by the guard horse, who acted more like an oversized guard dog. One driver, Mike Thompson, became a regular witness to Comet's antics and started bringing extra dog biscuits just to see the horse sit on his haunches like a dog, begging for treats. The local community began taking notice of Jake's unusual horse. Children from neighboring ranches would visit specifically to see the dog horse perform tricks. Comet had learned all the commands the dogs knew. Sit, which he performed by lowering his haunches, stay, come, and even a modified version of roll over, where he'd lie down and wiggle on his back like Scout did in the grass. Dr. Chun continued her observations, noting that Comet's social development was fascinating. He's completely imprinted on the dogs, she explained to Jake. In his mind, he is a dog. He's learned their social cues, their pack hierarchy, and their communication methods. She documented how Comet would bare his teeth in a dog-like grin when happy, flatten his ears when scolded, and even attempt to wag his tail. Though the physics of a horse's tail made this less effective than his canine siblings, the pack dynamics were equally interesting. Rex maintained his position as alpha, and remarkably, Comet accepted this hierarchy despite being 10 times Rex's size. When Rex barked a warning, Comet would immediately stop whatever he was doing and look to the German Shepherd for direction. Buddy had become Comet's best friend, and they were often found grooming each other. Buddy licking Comet's legs while Comet gently nibbled Buddy's golden fur. Scout, ever the working dog, had assigned himself as Comet's teacher, patiently showing the horse how to herd Jake's small flock of sheep. Everything changed the day Comet encountered his first real horses. Jake had been putting off introducing Comet to other equines, worried about how his unusual horse would react. But when a wild Mustang herd wandered onto the far edge of his property, the meeting became inevitable. Comet was grazing with the dogs when the herd appeared on the ridgeline. 12 horses led by a magnificent bay stallion. Comet's reaction was immediate and puzzling. He lifted his head, alert but confused, and looked to Rex for guidance. The dogs began barking at the strange intruders, and Comet joined in with his bark. Clearly viewing the Mustangs as potential threats to his pack's territory, the wild horses stopped, equally confused by the sound coming from what appeared to be one of their own. Jake watched nervously as the bay stallion began approaching, his posture dominant but curious. Comet's response was pure dog. He lowered his front end in a play bow, tail attempting to wag, then bounced back and forth like Scout did when meeting new dogs. The stallion stopped, head tilted, clearly bewildered by the strange behavior from what should have been another horse. When the stallion nickered a greeting, Comet didn't respond with a whinny, but instead turned to look at Rex, whining in confusion. He'd never heard that sound before and didn't know how to interpret it. Rex, sensing Comet's distress, moved protectively between his pack member and the strange horses, growling low. Buddy and Scout flanked Comet, creating a protective formation around their oversized packmate. The wild mare nearest to them stepped forward and attempted to sniff Comet in the typical horse greeting. Comet responded by trying to sniff her back the way dogs do, aiming for her rear end. The mare pinned her ears and squealed, offended by this inappropriate approach. Comet jumped back, hiding behind Rex and peering out like a scared puppy facing an angry cat. What followed was a comedic yet touching scene of miscommunication. The wild horses attempted various equine social gestures, mutual grooming invitations, peaceful grazing demonstrations, and friendly nickering. Comet responded to each with dog behaviors: play bows, attempts to initiate chase games, and confused head tilts. When a young filly tried to engage him in typical horse play, Comet grabbed a stick and pranced around trying to get her to play tug-of-war. Dr. Chun, whom Jake had called to observe this historic meeting, took detailed notes. "He is experiencing complete species dysphoria," she explained. "Comet doesn't recognize these animals as his own kind. To him, they're as foreign as cattle or deer would be." The session ended when Rex decided his pack member had endured enough stress and herded Comet back toward the barn. The loyal dogs formed a protective escort around their confused horse brother. The encounter with the wild horses triggered an identity crisis in Comet. For days afterward, he would stand at the fence line, staring at the distant herd with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. He'd make tentative whinnying sounds, his first real horse vocalizations, then immediately look guilty and revert to his bark neigh, as if he'd done something wrong. The dogs sensed his inner turmoil and stayed closer than usual, offering comfort in their own ways. Jake noticed Comet beginning to experiment with horse behaviors when he thought no one was watching. He'd practice trotting with the high-stepping gait he'd observed in the wild horses, then quickly revert to his bouncing dog-like gallop when the pack came running. He attempted to graze standing up instead of lying down like the dogs, but still insisted on bringing mouthfuls of grass to share with Buddy, dropping them at the retriever's feet like offerings. The situation reached a turning point when Comet injured his leg, jumping off a rock formation he'd seen the dogs navigate easily. As Dr. Chun treated the sprain, she gently explained to Jake that Comet needed to learn his physical limitations as a horse. "He's getting too big to keep acting like a dog," she said. "But we can't just thrust him into horse society either. He needs a gradual transition." Her solution was brilliant. She introduced Comet to a therapy horse named Gentle Ben, an elderly quarter horse known for his patience with troubled animals. Ben arrived the following week, and the meeting was carefully orchestrated. Comet approached Ben with his usual dog greeting, but instead of being offended, Ben stood patiently, allowing the unusual interaction. When Comet play bowed, Ben simply lowered his head in a hoarse greeting, creating a bridge between their different languages. Over the following days, Ben became Comet's translator between the dog and horse worlds. He grazed near the pack, showing Comet that horses could be part of a mixed species group. When Comet brought him sticks to play with, Ben would lip at them gently, not playing tug-of-war, but not rejecting the gesture either. Slowly, Ben introduced proper horse behaviors: mutual neck grooming, parallel grazing, and appropriate equine body language. The breakthrough came when Ben taught Comet to whinny properly. It started with Ben calling to Jake at feeding time and Comet wanting to participate, attempting to copy the sound. His first real whinny was shaky and uncertain, but Ben nickered encouragement. The dogs watched this development with what Jake swore was pride. Their pack member was learning new skills, even if they were strange horse skills. Rex even barked approval when Comet successfully whinnied for his dinner, establishing that horse sounds were acceptable in their pack. As autumn approached, Comet had become fluent in both dog and horse languages, creating a unique hybrid identity. He would whinny to greet Ben in the morning, then bark neigh at the mailman with his dog pack. He'd learned to run like a proper horse when racing across the pasture, but still insisted on carrying sticks and tennis balls in his mouth. The local news caught wind of the story, and soon Jake's ranch was flooded with visitors wanting to see the famous dog who thinks he's a horse. Or was it the horse who thinks he's a dog? The media attention brought an unexpected opportunity. A wild horse sanctuary in Wyoming was struggling with a group of orphaned foals who wouldn't bond with their surrogate horse mothers. The sanctuary director, watching footage of Comet's unique abilities, wondered if he might serve as a bridge between species. After much deliberation, Jake agreed to a trial visit, though his heart was heavy at the thought of Comet leaving, even temporarily. The journey to Wyoming was itself an adventure. Comet had never been in a horse trailer, and he insisted on riding with his head turned backward so he could see Rex, Buddy, and Scout in Jake's truck behind. At rest stops, he'd whinny for Ben, who was coming as his equine support, and bark for his dog pack, creating a symphony of sounds that drew curious onlookers. At the sanctuary, Comet's unique skills proved invaluable. The orphaned foals, traumatized and withdrawn, were initially frightened of adult horses, but Comet's playful, dog-like approach intrigued them. He dropped to the ground and wiggled on his back like Scout, making the foals curious rather than fearful. When they finally approached, he groomed them like Ben had taught him while play-bowing like his dog siblings had shown him. The transformation was remarkable. Foals who hadn't interacted with anyone began following Comet, learning horse behaviors from him while being comforted by his gentle dog-like patience. He'd share his hay by bringing mouthfuls to the smallest foals, a dog food-sharing behavior applied to horse feeding. When the foals were frightened by thunder, Comet would herd them into the shelter like Scout herded sheep, then lie down with them in a comforting pile like he did with his dog pack. The sanctuary staff was amazed. Dr. Ellen Martinez, the head veterinarian, documented how Comet seemed to understand fear and trauma in ways other horses didn't. He approaches these foals like a therapy dog would, she observed. But because he's a horse, they accept him as one of their own. He's essentially the world's first emotional support horse who acts like an emotional support dog. Videos of Comet working with the foals went viral, showing him teaching them to play with toys, respond to human kindness, and trust again. After 3 months at the sanctuary, Comet had successfully helped integrate 12 orphan foals into various foster herds. His unique approach had revolutionized the sanctuary's rehabilitation program. But Jake noticed something troubling during his visits. Comet was losing some of his dog-like behaviors. He still played and showed affection uniquely, but the constant company of horses was slowly overriding his canine programming. Jake faced an impossible decision: leave Comet where he was clearly needed or bring him home to his original pack. The decision was made for him when Rex fell seriously ill. Jake called the sanctuary, explaining he needed to bring Comet home immediately. The reunion at the ranch was emotional beyond words. Comet burst from the trailer, whinnying for Ben, then immediately began bark-neighing when he saw his dog pack. Rex, weak but alert, struggled to his feet, tail wagging. Comet dropped to the ground beside his canine father figure, gently nuzzling the old German shepherd. For the next week, Comet never left Rex's side. He'd bring the ailing dog mouthfuls of the softest hay, dropping them near Rex's bed as if offering comfort food. When Rex was too weak to go outside, Comet would lie by the barn door, half in and half out, keeping watch like the loyal pack member he'd always been. Buddy and Scout joined the vigil, and Jake often found all 4 animals piled together, offering mutual comfort. When Rex passed peacefully with his pack around him, Comet's grief was profound. He stood over Rex's still form, producing a sound none of them had heard before, a mournful combination of whinny and bark that seemed to express a sorrow beyond species boundaries. At Rex's burial beneath the old oak tree, Comet stood with Jake and the remaining dogs, his head bowed in unmistakable mourning. In the weeks that followed, Comet stepped into a new role. Without Rex's leadership, the pack dynamic shifted. To everyone's surprise, Comet began displaying protective alpha behaviors, watching over Buddy and Scout with increased vigilance. He'd patrol the property boundaries at dawn like Rex used to, his bark warning off potential intruders. When Scout developed arthritis, Comet would lie down so the border collie could lean against him for warmth. The sanctuary called, reporting that the foals Comet had helped were struggling without him. They offered him a permanent position with generous compensation for Jake and regular visiting rights for his pack. Jake was torn. Comet was clearly gifted at helping traumatized horses, but he was also an irreplaceable member of their family pack. As he watched Comet teaching Buddy's new golden retriever puppy how to herd, a hilarious sight of a horse demonstrating dog herding techniques, Jake realized the choice wasn't his to make. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Chun, who had been documenting Comet's journey from the beginning, proposed a revolutionary program. Why not create a rehabilitation center at Jake's ranch that combines Comet's unique abilities with traditional therapy approaches? The sanctuary agreed to partner, sending small groups of traumatized horses to work with Comet while allowing him to remain with his dog family. The cross-species healing ranch opened 6 months later. The first residents were 3 orphaned foals and 2 rescued horses with severe trust issues. Comet's approach was unlike anything in traditional horse therapy. He'd introduce new horses to his dog pack first, showing them that predator species could be family. Then he'd teach them his hybrid communication style, part horse, part dog, all heart. The sight of Comet leading a therapy session became legendary. He'd have traumatized horses following him as he played fetch with Buddy, gradually teaching them that play was safe. When working with aggressive horses, he'd demonstrate submission by rolling on his back like Scout, showing them that vulnerability didn't mean weakness. His bark neigh became a comfort sound to arriving horses, signaling that this was a place where different was accepted. 5-year-old Emma Morrison was the program's first human client. Severely traumatized and selectively mute after an accident, she hadn't spoken in months. Traditional therapy horses made her nervous, but Comet's dog-like behaviors made her smile. When Comet dropped a tennis ball at her feet and play bowed, Emma giggled. Her first vocalization in half a year. By session's end, she was throwing the ball while Comet and Buddy raced to retrieve it, calling out, "Good boys," to both. The program expanded rapidly. Veterans with PTSD found comfort in Comet's unique understanding of pack loyalty. Children on the autism spectrum connected with his different way of being in the world. Elderly clients laughed at his antics while finding peace in his gentle presence. Comet worked with each person and horse individually, somehow knowing whether they needed his horse wisdom or his dog playfulness. As Jake watched Comet work with a particularly withdrawn rescue horse, teaching it to play tug-of-war with a rope toy, he reflected on the journey. The orphaned foal, who'd been raised by dogs, had become a bridge between worlds, healing hearts across species barriers. Ben, now retired to the ranch, grazed nearby while Buddy's grandpuppies tumbled around Comet's feet. Scout, despite his arthritis, still tried to teach the young horses herding techniques. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples as Comet finished his session. He trotted over to Jake, carrying a stick in his mouth, tail swishing in his unique attempt at wagging. Behind him, a once traumatized mare was play-bowing to one of the puppies, having learned from the master of cross-species communication. Comet dropped the stick at Jake's feet and produced his signature bark neigh, a sound that had become the ranch's anthem. Dr. Chin's latest research paper would conclude that Comet had revolutionized understanding of animal behavior and interspecies bonds. But for Jake, watching his remarkable horse curl up with the dog for their evening rest, the lesson was simpler. Family isn't about species or conventional behavior. It's about love, acceptance, and the courage to be exactly who you are, even if you're a horse who thinks he's a dog. Comet's story didn't end there. His unique ability to connect with humans and animals alike made him a bridge between species, proving that differences aren't barriers, they're opportunities. Whether comforting veterans struggling with PTSD, helping children on the autism spectrum find joy, or simply bringing laughter to those who needed it most, Comet showed the world that being different is a superpower, not a limitation. This story is a powerful reminder that love knows no boundaries, and that sometimes the most unexpected friendships teach us the greatest lessons. If this tale touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of hope, healing, and the incredible bonds that unite us all. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that being uniquely you is something to be celebrated. And let us know in the comments, what lesson did you take away from Comet's journey? Thank you for joining us today, and remember, love truly has the power to change lives.